Let's talk a little bit more about those triggers. Where do those triggers really come from? Why is it that every time your wife sings, it just feels like nails on a chalkboard? Or why is it that every time your friend shows up late for, lunch, you get irritated, beyond really what that situation calls for? So the first step is identifying what is the trigger. And usually what happens is we have a trigger and then we have a response. And they're really close together, right? Trigger response, trigger response, trigger response, right? Like did they fire off one after the other? And the goal is to really put a space between them. So instead of having it be trigger response, trigger response, trigger response, in that infinitesimal space that is there, pause and go, halt, stop. And now let's get curious, right? What is this trigger? What's really going on with this trigger? Most of the time, the triggers are related to old programming that usually even stem back to childhood. How do you uncover that? It starts by getting curious in the moment. And then what's the next thing you do? So you've paused it. You've recognized, wait a minute, this is a trigger. Stop before you have the response. Then it becomes interrupting that pattern, because it's a pattern: trigger response, trigger response, trigger response, trigger response, right? And they're paired, they're so close together. And so when you can start putting some space, and now you get the trigger and you have an opportunity now to have a space, then you can choose your response rather than having it be automatic. And you can get curious about what that trigger really is. What is the emotion that you're feeling, right? What does that tie back to? What are other times that you felt that emotion? Start thinking about back in childhood, right? Were there times that you felt that emotion in childhood? And if there was, what was the situation that was going on? Most of the time, it's something that's been misplaced, right? It was misidentified in childhood, right? A situation happened, you felt an emotion, you applied a meaning to it, and then that became a belief that you carried forward many times without even realizing or knowing it. And it then becomes a trigger every time that it comes up because it brings you back to that old emotion. And so sometimes the response may be the opposite of what the response was. So maybe you felt hurt when you were younger, right? You had somebody that you cared about that absolutely shunned you, right? They just turned their back to you and walked away. And you felt really hurt. And now, when all of a sudden somebody shuns you, right, you don't feel hurt anymore, but you get angry. You get so mad and you start mouthing off at them, or you start, right, something happens. And why? Because that anger is protecting you from that hurt that you felt way back when you were a child. And that programming actually carried all the way forward into now and into the present. So, why does this matter, right? And I know that we're going really deep here, but why does this matter? Because if you're using the smoking as a coping mechanism and the trigger is what is causing that coping mechanism to kick into place, if you start unraveling the triggers, you start unraveling the need for a coping mechanism at all, right? We start pulling that apart, and now you don't even have to worry about finding a replacement behavior because we're really getting to the root of what's going on. And we're able to then say, okay, let's go ahead and get rid of that root. And once we get rid of the root, now the trigger disappears and you don't even have to worry about that coping mechanism and what are you going to do instead. I know this is, going into it at a much deeper level than most of the tips that I've been giving you, but I felt like it went hand in hand with the coping mechanism. So This is Rebecca with Mind Over Matter Hypnosis. I hope that you're enjoying the tips. And if you're curious, if you want to know more, or if you're, just reach out. I'm happy to do a free, call with you to just be able to see where you're at, right? And, are you ready to quit smoking? And do you really want to quit smoking? And even starting to explore those triggers and where do they originate from, and being able to work in that venue. So by all means, like I said, just reach out to me, text me, email, message me on Facebook. If you wanted to call me or text me, go to my website, www.hypnosismindovermatter.com. And then you can connect. All right. Thanks so much. And I hope you're having a great day.